Hello, I'm Esther Githui-Ewart. It's Tuesday, July 20th. Welcome to Africa 54.
The conflict in Ethiopia heats up as the Amhara region vows to attack Tigray forces. We'll take a closer look at the roots of South Africa's deadly riots. And in our health segment, explaining rising food insecurity and malnutrition on the continent.
In a Tigray town, young men and women marched to a training camp. Officials from 3 of Ethiopia's regions say they are sending troops in support of the federal army, raising fears of a showdown in Tigray's west that could spark a new refugee crisis. David Doyle has more.
In a northern Ethiopian town, young men and some women walked to a Tigrayan training camp. Video obtained by Reuters shows some of the newest recruits to forces loyal to the Tigray People's Liberation Front. With the news that 3 more Ethiopian regions, in addition to neighbouring Amhara, are sending troops in support of the federal army, the stage is being set for a showdown in Tigray's west. Since retaking the regional capital Mekelle and most of Tigray at the end of June, the TPLF has vowed its forces will keep fighting until it's regained all its pre-war territory. This week, Tigray leader Debretsion Gebremichael said they want the international community to persuade Amhara and Ethiopia's northern neighbour Eritrea to withdraw.
But we cannot wait for long if they are not going to leave. So at the end of the day, if they don't hit, then definitely there will be a fight to clear the invaders from our land.
Fighting broke out in November, and the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed declared victory 3 weeks later after seizing Mekelle. But the Tigrayans kept fighting after Abiy declared a unilateral ceasefire. They've recently recaptured much of Tigray's south, but the west, which is also claimed by Amhara, is heavily militarized. This month, Abiy told Parliament that Ethiopia could mobilise around 100,000 soldiers from regional special forces in less than a week. Officials from the Oromia, Sidama and Southern Nations Nationalities and Peoples regions have since confirmed that their forces have joined with the Ethiopian National Defence Force. Western Tigray has long been home to large populations of both Tigrayans and Amhara. Fresh fighting in the area could drive another wave of refugees from a conflict that has already forced 2 million from their homes.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. A South African court on Tuesday granted former President Jacob Zuma's request for a delay in his arms deal corruption trial. The court also adjourned proceedings for 3 weeks. Zuma is accused of receiving kickbacks over a $2 billion arms deal from the 1990s. He pleaded not guilty in May to charges including corruption, fraud and money laundering. He has evaded prosecution for more than a decade and portrayed himself as the victim of a politically motivated witch hunt. Efforts to hold him accountable are seen as a test of the country's ability to hold powerful politicians liable. More than 200 people have been killed and hundreds of businesses destroyed in the riots following the sentencing of former South African President Jacob Zuma to 15 months in prison. Protests initially flared in Zuma's home province, KwaZulu-Natal, before escalating into arson and looting in other provinces. For more perspective on the impact and other underlying causes of the riots, Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori spoke to Darren Taylor, a South Africa-based journalist.
Well, Vince, there have been reports of the riots and looting spreading to other towns and cities, but in very small ways. At this stage, it is still confined to Johannesburg, which seems to be calming down at the moment. And the big problem at the moment is still KwaZulu-Natal, specifically Durban. The city of Pietermaritzburg, which is near Durban, Well, basically, the looters have cleaned it out. People are saying, economists are saying, there is just no way that that town is going to recover anytime soon because it's basically gone in terms of infrastructure and goods and businesses. People have burned down factories, warehouses, etc.
This began as a protest against the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma, but obviously things morphed into a totally different thing. What are the people saying? What are they? What do they say is the motivation for what they're doing right now, or this destruction?
The Zuma factor faded when just about when the first fire was lit. As you say, it first started out as a few isolated protests about the incarceration of Jacob Zuma. Well, it quickly became something completely different. The people are telling me when I've been on the ground that you'll get people saying, yes, we're doing this because of Zuma. It has got absolutely at this stage nothing to do with Jacob Zuma. It seems to have been just a groundswell of dissatisfaction, lawlessness, criminality, criminal gangs joining the throngs of people and basically taking goods that before they never ever had access to. Also, the factor of poverty also faded pretty fast as well as the main motivation, because in many areas you had people who clearly were not poor pulling up to various places that they knew had been targeted by looters, pulling up in luxury vehicles and loading their vehicles as well. So we are dealing with a culture of criminality over here in South Africa that many analysts are blaming on the ANC, who have allegedly looted the state for the past 20 years. The people have obviously taken their lead from their leaders, and they also are controlled, or they also have a police force over here who they do not respect at all, who are often implicated in crimes themselves.
You know, this looked like an explosion that was triggered by something, it was waiting to happen. In the times preceding this, before even the incarceration of Zuma, had there been conversations on the issues of the lack of governments, to fulfill the needs of the people? Well, had there been any protests, anything that could have indicated that the society is just waiting to implode?
Vincent, ever since Jacob Zuma rose to power, and in fact, when Thabo Mbeki was still in power, there have been regular outbreaks of violence across South Africa in various cities, various towns, by people protesting the lack of service delivery. We're sitting at the moment with various state institutions such as Eskom, which is supposed to be our national power regulator, which have been absolutely hollowed out by corruption. Jacob Zuma put his lackeys over there and they completely mismanaged these state institutions. So we are sitting here at the moment with a complete breakdown of services. And who does this affect? Mostly the poor people. Because for years, the ANC has been promising development in certain areas. The development has never happened. Where it has supposed to have been happening, funds have been stolen, allegedly, by government members themselves. There's always mass corruption around tenders. We are seeing at the moment various ANC people, in fact, Jacob Zuma himself, ready to go into the dock because of grand corruption. So those are the things that the people have seen down the years.
I think could be the worst riots in years, and of course the wanton looting. From what you're hearing, how might this impact the ANC and Jacob Zuma and Cyril Ramaphosa's government?
Well, Vince, the ANC didn't need this to split it even further, but I can tell you now that it is split even further. And there are allegations now that Jacob Zuma acolytes and people who are still, in fact, loyal to Jacob Zuma within the Ramaphosa government have actually instigated this violence. They might not have been completely at the helm and completely in control, but very intelligent people are telling me that they believe that these people, at the very least, fomented the violence and were not upset at all that this violence unfolded.
That was Africa 54 Managing Editor Vincent Makori speaking to Darren Taylor, a South Africa-based journalist. 2 men armed with knives attempted to stab Mali's transitional president Kano Assimi Goita Tuesday morning in Bamako's Central Mosque after Eid al-Adha prayers, according to a reporter who was present for the morning prayers. Goita was not injured in the attack, and the assailants were apprehended by security forces. Assimi Goita was a leader in the August 2020 coup, which deposed former Malian President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta. He became interim president after another military coup in May of this year, which deposed the then interim civilian president Ban Doyle. Elections are scheduled for February 22nd. Female refugees are among the most vulnerable, missing an education, a problem made worse by the coronavirus pandemic. To combat the challenge, the U.S.-funded group Refugee offers learning programs for refugee women and girls in Kenya. Brenda Mulinya has our report from Nairobi.
Fartum Garad fled Somalia to a Kenya refugee camp after militia attacked her home and killed her father 4 years ago. She joined her only surviving relative in Nairobi and was able to get support and education even during the pandemic thanks to a U.S.-funded aid group Refugee.
During the pandemic, we are given funds that we are learning at home. Yeah, it was a little bit, it was challenging because of the network connection, because of the distraction of the neighbor. It was very hard to concentrate the class at the full time. Sometimes maybe you don't listen well the way the teacher is explaining.
Refugee supports refugee women and girls in Kenya because they are more likely to miss out on education and be exploited than males. The coronavirus pandemic has made them even more vulnerable, says Refugee Kenya CEO Geoffrey Thige.
They're the ones who are vulnerable to, sexual gender-based violence at the home level. When they are exposed to especially a lot of free time, they end up being very needy. And being needy, they end up also being vulnerable to issues to do with prostitution. And these are economical challenges that these young girls have.
Refugee provides a safe house for refugee girls and their children, as well as education and job skills training. Ethiopian refugee Dera Anyanya has lived in Kenya with her parents since she was 2 years old. Refugees Girl Empowerment Program has helped her pursue a dream of becoming a computer programmer.
As refugees, most of us we are taken as ladies. Most of us we are taken as we are supposed to stay home, do the household chores, get married, get children, take care of the children, your family. So that's why you find more refugees, men or boys, are more educated than the ladies.
The United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says there are more than 80,000 urban refugees and asylum seekers in Kenya, 80% of them women and children.
They're facing a lot of cultural barrier which make them forcibly married or early married, and also that they're exposed to a lot of sexual and gender-based violence, and also that lack of education and lack of livelihood opportunity.
Those are challenges that aid groups like Refugee are helping women and girl refugees in Kenya to overcome. Brenda Mulinya for VOA News, Nairobi.
We're excited to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come. An alarming increase in food insecurity leaves millions hungry amid a global pandemic. We'll be right back.
Join me on the next Straight Talk Africa, when we'll look at Africa's urban future. As the continent continues to urbanize, how will cities accommodate those flocking there and those who are already there? We'll also talk smart cities in Africa. How smart is the idea itself? And we'll hear what you love and don't love about your city. We'll bring you all of that on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back. Welcome back to Africa 54. The number of people unable to access adequate food in the world is on the rise. A report by United Nations agencies, including the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme, indicates that food insecurity has been rising since the mid-2010s. According to the 2021 edition of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report, the number of undernourished people climbed 768 million. That's about 118 million more people than in 2019. The increase last year was equal to that of the previous 5 years combined, and it's most likely due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Some African countries, including Madagascar and Ethiopia, are dealing with food insecurity and malnutrition. For more, Africa 54 health correspondent Nino Mudu spoke with Cindy Holman, a senior economist with Food and Agriculture Organization.
This is the first assessment since we had the COVID pandemic. So it's quite an important report. And in terms of the 2020 estimates, we're seeing that between 720 million up to around 811 million people in the world are hungry. So this is our world hunger number for 2020. What we see is that this is about 161 million more people in a single year. And it's the largest increase we've seen in a single year in decades.
And what are some of those drivers?
One is conflict. So in many countries, conflicts are becoming more complex, intractable. They lead to displacement and spillover effects. Second is climate. Climate extremes are becoming more frequent and also more variable. So our analysis shows that where there's climate extremes and variability, this is also leading to increases in hunger. And the third one, even before COVID, was economic downturns. So where countries were experiencing slowing economies or contractions, we saw rises in hunger. So these three main factors combined also with unaffordability of healthy diets. Most countries around the world, the poor cannot afford nutritious foods, and that's contributing to food insecurity and malnutrition. So we've estimated around 3 billion people cannot afford healthy diets. And only one other thing I'd like to add, we're seeing that where there's high levels of inequality in terms of access to incomes, health services, assets, so it's almost doubling the impact of these drivers.
Now, would you give us a regional overview? Where are we seeing the most increases?
Well, if we look at 2020 last year, the sharpest increases in hunger were in Africa. And where we see what's happening in Africa is they were also affected by all three other drivers. So you saw the economic slowdowns combining with climate-related disasters, or also conflict. Africa last year showed the sharpest increase, but also Latin America was close behind. And that was economic downturns also combined with climate. But if we look at the numbers in terms of the regions, more than half of the hungry people live in Asia. But the highest increases are in Africa. And some of our projections, even though it's difficult to project, we see that Africa is going to overtake Asia in the next few years and having the highest number of hungry people if we don't start to turn things around.
What can be done to tackle these issues, these variables that are driving hunger and malnutrition? I mean, it's a lot to take on, but where do we start?
We have to address the complexity. And what we recommend is that countries need to look at what specific drivers are driving their increase. Like in Africa, it can be a combination. In Asia, it's climate more. In Latin America, it's economic and climate. So you need to understand the context of the driver. And then what we see is that you need a systems approach to doing your policies and actions. We can't think in silos anymore. And what we see is that these drivers impact on our food system. So it's from production to marketing to sales, that it's across the board. So we recommend 3 things. One is to build resilience into the food system, such that if there is a climate shock, you have your climate resilient technologies in production, in terms of your storage capacities that can resist that, your climate risk insurance. You also need to look, if you have conflict, you need to integrate not just response to meeting the immediate response of food aid, but you need to build in peace building, and you need to address the issue of the migration and the displacement, and build in livelihood support. And where there's economic slowdowns, you need to build up social protection systems so that people don't just fall into hunger and lose their livelihoods when there is an economic downturn. We need to protect small businesses and informal sectors. Ultimately, we've got to get on top of inequality. There is too much inequality related to access to resources and income, and that's a big one, whether it's land, whether it's access to credit, to health services. We're going to have to protect the many and bring them up if we're really going to solve this problem. So we need governments to take political action to really prioritize ending hunger, or we're going to see hunger continue to increase. And if we see hunger increase, it's a vicious circle of poverty, which is going to bring down the economy. It's going to cause more displacement. We have to address the drivers head on, and we need political commitment and increased investment.
That was Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu speaking with Cindy Holman, a senior economist with the Food and Agriculture Organization. Muslims in Lagos were shopping on Monday for the Eid al-Adha holiday, which marks the end of Ramadan season. Also known as Eid al-Kabir in Nigeria, the festival celebrates the day of sacrifice when Muslims the world over kill animals and feed the poor to seek God's forgiveness. But the government on Saturday announced that it had put 6 states on red alert after seeing a worrisome rise in COVID-19 infections, urging people to curb gatherings and hold prayers outside the mosque. The news has left many Muslims disappointed. Nigeria marks Eid al-Kabir on Tuesday and Wednesday this week. Like most parts of the continent, Nigeria, which is Africa's most populous nation, is now facing a 3rd wave of COVID-19 after detecting the more transmissible Delta variant. More than 50% of Nairobi's nearly 5 million people live in slums where many young people are lured by drugs and crime. In one neighborhood, a group is using the game of chess to help transform the lives of young people. Lenny Ruvaga reports.
Sarah Mumanyi is a chess player in Mukuru Kwanjenga, one of Kenya's informal settlements. At 15, she's a teen sensation in the sport, but her start wasn't easy.
When I started playing chess, it was hard because I was like the only girl, and my grandmother she never supported me because of playing with boys. It was really hard.
It's been 5 years since a sports outreach ministry introduced chess to this informal settlement to help keep young people away from drugs and crime. Every Saturday, the students here practice the game for 5 hours. The sport has provided a safe avenue for Mumanyi and other young residents to hone and perfect their skills. The chess initiative has drawn about 800 students from various schools within Mukuru Kwanjenga, which has a population of about 500,000 people. Josephat Owila is a national chess instructor and head coach with the Sports Outreach Ministry.
Socially, they are good because they can be able to coexist with others in the society. Also, in their schools, their respective schools, they are performing well, which means that they are critical thinkers and they are creative also.
John Mukabi, the head of Chess Kenya, the national body that manages the sport, told VOA the sport faces challenges in the country.
For these informal settlement areas like here in Kwajenga, they don't have internet connection. They need laptops and things like that, and also chessboards.
Still, the young residents play the game despite obstacles. As for Momani, she continues to practice every day and hopes to one day become a grandmaster. Lenny Rovaga for VOA News, Nairobi, Kenya.
After last year's Summer Olympics in Japan were postponed because of the coronavirus pandemic, some American student athletes have been balancing school and training in anticipation of this year's games in Tokyo. Connor Smith has our report.
College athletes had to put their Olympic dreams on hold while balancing classwork with training after the 2020 Tokyo Games were postponed because of COVID-19. One of those students is Megan Jastrab, who attends Milligan University in Tennessee. She will be competing in track cycling for Team USA this summer. To participate in the Olympics, cyclists must be at least 19 years old. But Jastrab was only 18 last summer during qualifications, turning 19 this January. The COVID delay gave her time to become eligible to ride in Tokyo.
For me personally, it definitely allowed me to mature an extra year and to grow and just get more time on the track, which was really nice for me.
Jastrab relocated to the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs from Milligan after her first semester in 2019. She's been taking virtual classes while training for Tokyo, a difficult schedule to juggle.
If you're kind of getting late into the training block, the last thing you want to do is come home, open up your laptop, and do schoolwork. It's the hardest part, I think, is just like being committed to doing the school. And I'm motivated in my academics and training, so it's a little bit easier for me.
Andrew Capabianco, an American diver who attends Indiana University, says balancing school and training has helped him prepare for Tokyo.
Over the past year, I've definitely learned how to balance that in a really good way, and I think that that's what kind of set me up for success leading into this Olympic year.
Bulgarian swimmer Atani Ivanov, who attends Virginia Tech, says the pandemic gave him and other athletes more time to rest before the games.
I think that's why we're seeing so many better results in all sports after the pandemic, because people just kind of rested mentally from the pressure and from the stress of their specific sport.
Some 11,000 athletes will compete at the Tokyo Olympics. Former Olympian Paul Wiley says the student athletes on Team USA should soak up the experience and rely on the mental energy that they have built up through countless hours balancing school and training.
That's our show for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.